Hello everyone, welcome back to another video about the first historical period of the APUSH curriculum. Today we're going to be looking at key concept 1.2.1, the origins and immediate effects of the Columbian Exchange. So before this, in our previous video, we looked at basically everything leading up to the Columbian Exchange. So what was sort of the existing civilization with Native Americans looking like before Europeans came over. Now, that's a very small part of the curriculum. We're going to look at now what happened in sort of the immediate vicinity of the Columbian Exchange, what kind of led this to happen from Europe, so kind of push factors, and then how did that begin to develop with European introduction, and how that all developed. So, away we go. All right, so the first thing that we're going to look at are some of the factors that related to why European exploration of the New World began to come about. There were some push factors, some pull factors. We often use those two terms when we talk about immigration or migration of any sort. So we're going to look at some early European excursions into the Americas, and then we'll get to Columbus after that. So Columbus was not the first European to think about that there might be lands beyond the Atlantic Ocean where there might be resources. So, again, it did happen, but it was not really, looking to sort of have a lasting influence. Some of the early European explorers to be in the Americas were Norse seafarers. So if you want to be all dramatic, you can call them Vikings. I call them Norse seafarers. Basically what they were doing is they were getting out of sort of the Scandinavia area and getting all the way to Greenland and Newfoundland. So Newfoundland's all the way in Canada. Now, when they got there, they were there for fishing. So they weren't there to sort of set down roots, to take over the land, to imperialize, to sort of force their worldview upon this new land. They were saying, hey, resources are scarce, and we found this new area where we can fish for cod, and then we can catch that and bring it back to Europe to make money. So what that meant is that settlements within these areas were intentionally short term. So it's not like there was a lasting civilization built by these Norse seafarers, but what it meant is that Europeans were aware that there was some land beyond there. Now, really what happened is European interest in the New World began because of how Europe began to expand trade into Asia and Africa. Now, I want you to look at that map in the middle on the right. You can see these trade routes for how Europe was trying to trade with Africa and with Asia. There were two possibilities for how to do that. You could either go over land through the Middle East and all the way through the Near East into the Far East, like China, or you could go all the way around Africa to get there. Now, neither of these were desirable trade routes for Europeans. They would either have to pay taxes, they might be subject to sort of being robbed of their goods or their money along the way. And initially, for going around Africa, Europe simply did not have the technological capabilities to do that. But as the Middle Ages are ending, there is some growing prosperity, national unifications within Europe, and there's new power structures with money that they could invest in exploration. The Middle Ages are kind of this dark era within Europe where the only sort of lasting element of stability was the Catholic Church. It's the only thing that kind of existed. Economies were in ruins. There was sort of no intellectualism. There was no academia. A lot of the things that existed when we look back to Rome and Greece before that, all those were gone. Okay, it was just sort of large peasantry going on. That is ending when sort of the politics are evolving. So what that makes is kind of this context where European exploration may happen. There were three goals that are stated otherwise in the descriptor on the left. We can sum them up in three words: glory, God, and gold. 3 G's. Okay? For glory, what we're talking about is that these new nation states that eventually build into empires are competing with each other. So when it says economic and military competition, European countries are now getting rich and powerful enough that they're looking to maintain that wealth and power and to compete with others to make sure they are the wealthiest and the most powerful. Empires are a good way to expand your wealth and your power. So that's kind of on the country scale. On the individual scale, you had many men living in Europe that would have been peasants. They didn't have access to owning land, and land meant power. They thought, if I can get out of Europe where there's this land that we can get to, maybe I can get some of that power and wealth as well. Next up, like I said before, the Catholic Church was the last sort of vestige of stability within Europe through the Middle Ages. So coming out of the Middle Ages into the Renaissance and these new eras, the Catholic Church was very powerful. So the idea of spreading religion existed as well. And gold. So basically, metal itself has an intrinsic value. So most civilizations agree that metal is a good form of money. So you can break it up into smaller units. It's shiny, it's desirable. Gold and silver don't really tarnish too much, so you don't have to worry about them sort of getting damaged over time. And they last. So what that meant is that when you look for something that has wealth, and they thought that it existed within the Americas, they wanted to go over there and get more of it. Okay. Also, there were natural resources available in the Americas that were not in Africa or Europe or Asia. We're going to talk about those a little bit later, and that exchange, the Columbian Exchange, is going to vastly change how the economy works around the world, but also what goods and resources are available to many different people all over the world. So you can see there's a few reasons for why European exploration developed in this time period. Know the three G's. And know kind of the early exploration that led up to the Columbian Exchange, which is up next. All right, so the Columbian Exchange, we're not talking about the place where they trade coffee down in Colombia. Columbian is an adjective for Christopher Columbus. Now, I put in quotation marks here that he discovers the West Indies. Okay, really, it's the most successful failure in history. So, there's a lot of myths that go along with him that everyone thought the world was flat, and he thought the world was round, and so he thought he could, prove the world was round. That's a myth. People knew the world was round. Okay, I can talk about this in class if you want. What he was looking for is he knew the world was round, and he thought that he could just go straight around the Atlantic Ocean, that it was going to connect with China and India along the other side of the world, that it would be a longer trip, but it would be good in the long run. So he didn't know he was going to run into the Americas there. Okay, what he discovers there are the West Indies. So it's called the West Indies because he thought he was in India. By the time he died, Europe knew it wasn't India anymore, but sort of the myths that go along with this claim that he still claimed till his dying breath that he had gotten to India. All right. Now I put discovers in quotation marks because, of course, the Native Americans knew that land was there. It wasn't anything new to them, but it was new for Europe. Okay, so what did he actually get? So he landed in Santo Domingo on the island of Hispaniola. That's the modern day Dominican Republic. And there he sets down the first permanent European settlement, and then he uses that as a base from which more Spanish exploration can happen. So Columbus made 4 voyages to America, each with different goals along the way. The first was just like, wow, look what we found. The second was going to bring in more conquistadors and more conquering, later bring in more colonists to set up an organization to rule the area. All right, so Europe now knows about the Americas, and Spain discovered it, so they tend to have more power and influence, control there. And now there's going to be this exchange of things back and forth. So there's going to be new resources, mineral wealth, so gold and silver, crops available for Europe. That's going to make some changes back home. The biggest thing we're going to talk about here is how the Columbian Exchange facilitated the shift from feudalism to capitalism. So, feudalism. Feudalism is this old idea. It's what existed in the Middle Ages in Europe. It's the idea that you have a king in charge. The king below him are a bunch of lords who own the land, and then the land is worked by the peasants in return for protection from the lord. Okay, so power was focused in the hands of the lord there because they were the ones that controlled the land. Okay, and that had existed for centuries in Europe. But over time, we start to see a shift away from sort of power in land to power in money. Okay, and what we see why that happens is partially because of banking houses. So as we get out of the Middle Ages in Europe, that means that people have money and they need a place to store it. So banks say, we'll hold on to it for you, and what do they do in the process? They invest all that money on their own behalf, making sure the money's there sort of in name for the person, but making sort of a profit for themselves on the side. That's how banking works. There was then the desire for more places to house your silver and your gold because of the discovery of especially silver within Argentina. The name Argentina literally means like land of silver. Okay, so capitalism means you value things that have monetary economic value, and you can see that's a shift from feudalism because it's not just land is value and power, but money is value and power. Okay, also this had to do with the exchange of natural resources. So because there were many cash crops, things like cotton and indigo and tobacco, that were not available in Europe, this is going to create an exchange of goods that really benefits Europe. It makes their population grow faster because they have these new goods, especially if you think of corn, the potato, the tomato, the avocado, all the great things came from America. And this is going to create better nutrition for Europeans. Okay? And the desire to trade that, of course, fits into capitalism, which is based on trade, based on money. Okay, so with this shift, with all this exchanging going on, this was the beginning of a global economy. So Europe had to offer markets and capital. So capital is money that can be invested into other enterprises. Markets are places where things can be bought and sold on the large scale. Africa ended up offering sort of labor in the form of African slave labor, which we're going to talk about at a later time. America provided the natural resources and land. Okay, and this is going to create an Atlantic economy that, again, we're going to talk about at a later time in very, deep detail. But the idea is these different areas have different things to offer, and it's going to revolutionize what's going on in the world economy using the Atlantic Ocean as the medium through which all things are traded in that area. Okay, so no longer do we have separated hemispheres and separated development. The world is dependent upon each other, especially with the Americas, Europe, and Africa. Okay, our last slide here has a little bit to do with again, why were the Europeans able to explore, and also what did this new technology that enabled them to explore lead to in the development of colonialism. So new seafaring technology had been available, and that's really what developed that sea travel that led to the Columbian Exchange. Initially, this was led by Portugal, so they weren't really interested in getting to the Americas. Their thing was finding a route to Asia. But what they found along the way is they could go along the coast of Africa to various trading posts and trade along the way before they would eventually get to Asia. Okay, they're also the ones that first kind of get involved in the slave trade because they were continuously in these ports that were already selling slaves. So what were some of these technological inventions? The sextant, the astrolabe, quadrant, hourglass, compass, cartography, all these different things that on their own aren't especially going to be perfectly helpful. You put them all together, suddenly you're able to decide with an hourglass, how long does it take to get places? Compass, where is north? Astrolabe, deciding what is the latitude you're at when you align it with the stars. Cartography, using all those things in order to create maps so you can follow the maps just as easily as you're using these new inventions. Okay, that leads to a few inventions of maps, and part of that has to do with Amerigo Vespucci. So that's actually where the name America comes from. He of course, we talk about Columbus all the time, but why aren't we called North Columbia and South Columbia? It's because in a very popularized map, it was claimed that Amerigo Vespucci was the one that discovered this stuff. So basically, the map maker named it America because he credited Vespucci, and as a result, here we are in America. Okay? So realized that the reason the Europeans could explore is because of new technology, and that was kind of like a catalyst in this process that continued exploration for the next few centuries. Okay, now something that got developed along the way has to do with banking, are things called joint stock companies. Now it's a red term, so you need to know this one. It's a good one to know. So it's built on the economic concept of capital and investment. So, like I said, coming out of the Middle Ages, their wealthy people started to have more money, things of value, to invest. And the idea was you give it to companies who are looking to go make something happen. So a company might say, hey, we've got all these ships. We're going to now be a company that trades back and forth between the Americas and Europe, but we don't have enough money to get this going. How about you give us your extra money? You invest in us. When we make money, you make money. Okay? As the company's value increases, so does the stock in that company. So notice that word stock there. It's like the stock market today. It's how it works. You give other people, corporations, your money, they invest it in their company, and then when the value of their company goes up, so does the value of their company that you own just a little bit. Okay? Banks are going to manage all that wealth and, of course, increase the value for themselves by loaning money in the process. They also offer credit. So, what that means is you can buy stuff without paying for it right away. And basically, banks kind of fuel this Atlantic economy as joint stock companies do. So you can see there's basically new power and economic structures being created throughout the Columbian Exchange that radically change how countries and people interact economically. So through this process, Europe is really at the top of the financial world because they are controlling transatlantic trade with all these new resources that were available within the Americas. And you can see that fuels capitalism, capitalism that needs people to be involved in extensive trade of valuing material things, physical things, rather than just land. And in the process, creates a socioeconomic class system. So feudalism, as we talked about before, has a clear hierarchy, and capitalism maintains a hierarchy, but it's based on wealth instead of just land ownership or based on just what titles you get from the monarch. And that's going to sort of have repercussions way down the line in European history that we're not really talking about here. All right, thank you so much for watching. Remember, you've got next steps when you do these videos, so create a note card for each slide where you choose a red or yellow term, preferably a red term. So looking back here, good ones to choose: capitalism, the New World, joint stock corporations. So I just browsed through it, found 3 red terms. You know how to do those. You've got a quiz on this due through Google Classroom. We'll go over it in class. Work on your geography assignment, do the day of the unit test, study chronology and geography for those quizzes towards the end of the unit, and the next video is ready if you are. Alright, so this is Mr. Chodola signing off. Thank you for watching as always, and I'll see you in class. Bye.